How is it possible to play New Super Mario Bros. Wii and piano at the same time? The first thing you should know is that I'm using Dolphin Emulator. This allows me to use any controllers that I want, as well as make custom controls, so that's how this is all possible. These controls are inspired by my handless Mario Kart 8 Deluxe controls, which involves strapping one Joy-Con to the head for motion controls, and the other Joy-Con to the bottom of your foot for both motion controls and pressing buttons. The way I have these controls set up is so that the left Joy-Con, or the head con, replaces the D-pad by leaning in the corresponding directions. So leaning left, right, forward, and back replaces the inputs of the D-pad. The right Joy-Con has two buttons that I can press. The right bumper, which I use for running, I push this button down with my toes, and then the R stick button, which I use for jumping. And I usually press this button down by pushing the controller into the ground, which pushes the joystick into my foot, pressing the button. Another feature that I have is if I hold the run button with my toes and lean forward with my head, I can trigger a shake input. This could be anything a shake does in the original game, such as doing a spin move or picking an item up. Throughout this game, you can also find tilt-controlled objects, so I linked all of the tilt inputs to my foot controller, so I can lean my foot left and right to control these objects, separate from leaning my head left and right to control Mario. Here's a demonstration of some gameplay. I can lean right to go right, I can lean back to slide, I can push the controller into the ground to jump, and I can lean back to go down pipes. If I hold the run button, I can lean to run, and if I lean forward while holding the run button, I can do a spin move. I can also do this to pick items up, and if I release the run button, I can throw it. Over here, there are some motion-controlled platforms, which can be controlled with my foot, separate from leaning with my head to control Mario. And that's basically everything. To make my life easier, I use the official Nintendo Joy-Con leg strap, as well as cheaper off-brand versions of the same product, to strap these controllers to my body. But you don't have to use these. Any way of strapping them to your body will work just fine. I suppose it doesn't matter which Joy-Con's on the head and which one's on the foot, but I prefer a right Joy-Con on the foot simply because the joystick is positioned in a much better place for this context. I think it's much easier to press this joystick in rather than the left Joy-Con, which has it much higher. The way I have it set up is so that the left Joy-Con is on the back of my head out of view, and the right Joy-Con is on the bottom of my foot with the buttons facing up, and I position it comfortably and not too tight. I prefer my left foot because I use my right foot for the piano sustain pedal, but if you're not going to be playing piano, I guess it doesn't really matter which foot you use. If you want, you can experiment with new controller setups, possibly using two feet con rather than one head con and one foot con, and this would allow for two extra available buttons. However, I found that I can do everything in the game without my hands using my current setup, so I don't think that's needed. The only thing I can't do without my hands is press plus or minus, but I just mapped out some buttons on my head controller so I can just use my hand, because I don't really need to press those buttons while I play the game. Alright, so how did I set this up? The first step is you need to be able to Bluetooth connect your two Joy-Cons to your PC, as I have right here. If you're unable to do this, I'm not really sure how to help. It may be that your PC or your motherboard is not compatible with Bluetooth controllers or something. I'm not really sure. I'm not a tech person, but I'm sure you can find an answer somewhere on the internet. Okay, next up, you can open up Dolphin, and up here there's the controllers tab. We're dealing with Wii games, so we're going to go to the Wii remotes, and in Wii Remote 1, you can choose Emulated Wii Remote and hit Configure. And this is where we can customize our controls however we would like. Before we can map out our inputs, we need to first choose our device, or in our case, our two Joy-Cons. There should be a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con L/R option. This is our left and right Joy-Cons paired together. If there's any other options, just ignore them. This is the one that we want. One last thing before we start mapping out buttons. Over here, there's the extension option, which you can use to emulate any of these Wii Remote extensions. We're just going to use the nunchuck to avoid some confusion. I do this because if you play New Super Mario Bros. Wii without a nunchuck, you're actually using a sideways Wii Remote, which means that up on the D-pad is actually left in real life, as well as left in the game. But if you use a Wii Remote and nunchuck, left on the D-pad is left in real life and left in the game. So it all lines up and is a lot less confusing. When mapping buttons to buttons, it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is find the button you want it to be, click next to it, and then push the button that you want to link to it. So for us, A is going to be our jump button, and we want the jump button to be our right joystick button. All you have to do is click here, push the button you want it to be, and it should be linked. And you can click it to see if it lights up, and that's how we know that it works. B is going to be our run button. We want it to be our right bumper, so all we have to do is click here and press the right bumper. Those are the only buttons that we really need to play the game, but I highly recommend mapping out some plus and minus buttons so you can pause the game and stuff. And I chose the minus button on the head controller to be minus in the game, and the left bumper on the head controller to be our plus button or our pause button. And that's it for buttons. Now is when things start to get a little more complicated. We're going to be linking the motion inputs of our left Joy-Con or our head con to the buttons of the D-pad. So we're going to start with left and right. You can right click on the box to open up this window, and this is where we can completely customize how to trigger this button. As we scroll through all these possible inputs, we start to get all these values that are changing. These are all of our motion values. So the first set of values is going to be accel and gyro, not specified to either Joy-Con, but I'm pretty sure it defaults to these values being the right Joy-Con. Doesn't really matter, but below that set you could find accel L and gyro L. These are all of our left Joy-Con motion values, and below that is the same thing but with our right Joy-Con. We're only going to be looking at the accel L values because we're dealing with the left Joy-Con, and what I found is that if you lean to the left, the accel L right value goes up, and when you lean to the right, the accel L left value goes up. And right now we're in the D-pad left window, so I wanted leaning left to trigger left on the D-pad. And what I found is that if I use accel L right, the value goes up, so it seemed fitting for the job. I clicked on it, hit select, and it pops up down here. I already have it, so I'm going to get rid of that. And all I added is greater than 2.5. So when this value goes above 2.5, then I get an output. This is just so I have a little bit of leeway so that only when I lean to the left enough will I get an output. This number can be changed. The smaller you make it, closer to 0, the easier it will be to trigger left on the D-pad, and the greater that value is, the harder it will be to trigger left on the D-pad. So you can change this based on what feels best for you, but that's all there is to it. All of the other D-pad values are going to be the exact same, except for right, you're going to use accel L left, and up and down are not opposites of each other, so accel L up is for up, and accel L down is for down. You can see I did change the value for accel L down, because when I strap the controller to my head, naturally it does lean back a little bit, and when I was playing the game, I would accidentally push down on the D-pad, triggering a ground pound when I didn't want to. So I made the value a little bit harder. I had to lean back further to push down on the D-pad so that it only does it when it's intentional. Next up is mapping our shake. Up here in the motion simulation tab, we can find the shake box. And there's 3 values, X, Y, and Z. Just put the same thing in all 3 boxes and it should work fine. As a reminder, I wanted shakes to happen when I'm holding the run button and leaning forward with the head controller. So right here is pretty much the same thing I just did for up on the D-pad, accel L up, except I made this value 6, so only when I leaned forward greater than the value of 6. And then shoulder R is our other button right here, the run button. And in between, I put the and symbol. So when I'm leaning forward greater than the value of 6 and pressing shoulder R, then I get the output. and that's all there is to that. Last but not least is mapping our tilt inputs. As a reminder, there are objects in the game that can be controlled by tilting a Wii remote left and right, and I wanted to link these to the motion inputs of my foot controller. So it's the same idea as what we did for left and right on the D-pad, except instead of using Excel L, we're going to be using Excel R values, which is our motion inputs of our right Joy-Con. As you can see, I made the left input greater than 4 and the right input greater than 2. This is because the natural resting position of the controller on my foot hangs around the value 1 in Excel R right. I wanted the triggers of the left and right to be equal value away from my resting position. So I made it 3 integers to the left and right away from this. So to trigger left, I need to lean 3 more integers to the left. 1, 2, 3 to get an output. But then 3 integers to the right of this value would be 1 to get to 0, and then 2 more to here. And that's how I got the values 4 and 2 for left and right. You can obviously just guess and check to play around with what is comfortable, but if you want to think of it the way I just did, that also works. Just honestly, for all of these motion values, just experiment playing the game, and when something feels a little too easy or too hard to do, just change the value based on what it feels to you. That's what I did, and that's kind of how I got all of these values, which work pretty well for me. Lastly, make sure that you go up to Profile, give it a name, and click Save. This will allow you to have many different presets for your custom controls, and you can click and load them anytime that you want. And that should be everything for my custom handless controls for New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I hope this was easy to follow, and I hope you were able to learn something new. Remember that you can use these same ideas, especially with the motion inputs with Joy-Cons, to come up with your own custom controls. So I hope I was able to help you with your own projects. And that should be everything. Thank you for watching. See ya.